Good afternoon, Bronwyn. Thank you for joining me today. We were so excited to have you contribute to our fourth Industrial Revolution webinar before schedules got in the way. And although you joined us during our panel discussion, I know that our viewers were disappointed that we didn't hear enough from you. And so I'm delighted to have your company for today's short session. Our discussion today is focused on the impact of the fourth Industrial Revolution, by which we mean the convergence of several technologies: machine learning, autonomy, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, cybernetics, the list goes on, that threaten or promise great change. Can we start with an introduction from yourself? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm Bronwyn Williams, and I'm a partner at Flux Trends, and we look at how trends are impacting on businesses and hopefully give our clients insights on how those trends can translate into opportunities and into threats to be avoided from.
Lovely, thank you very much. So let's get stuck into the questions. Now, the first one, we know that you look at future trends. And I just want to ask you what you see as the big opportunities that the fourth industrial revolution will bring in the next 10 or 20 years.
Well, I think the main thing to realize about the 4IR, or Fourth Industrial Revolution technologies, is that they are accelerating the pace of change rather than perhaps changing society itself as we know it. They're just making it that much easier for us to do that much more with that much less. So they're really fast tracking the future. I think the opportunities are to do exactly that, to increase productivity and to do more with less, which means that these technologies could, if viewed the right way, be some of the best things we could do to protect ourselves against the sustainability issues that we are facing as a global nation of humans today.
Yes, and interestingly, actually, one of our webinars, our final webinar in the series, was looking at how not just the fourth industrial revolution, but lots of skills in the aerospace and defence sector were going to address or could address the global challenges. So I think the fourth industrial revolution is really quite a powerful one because it's the underlying thread amongst all the new technology that's coming into the N&D sector itself. So on that note, I'll ask you this question. So how can we or countries, or should we even try to control and channel the development of the fourth industrial revolution?
Well, I think that is it's one of those delicate questions. So yes and no. I don't think that we should over-govern these technologies to hold back technology from progressing to its full potential. But at the same time, we have to make sure that regulation and governance is growing up at the same speed that technology is, so the technology doesn't end up eating the world, as we say, there's a whole sort of software eating the world concepts, which is when technology stops being a tool to help make humanity better and starts becoming almost weaponized, although that's perhaps not the best word to use. So it starts working against us rather than working for us. And I think that one of the biggest issues in the globe at the moment is this whole concept of inequality. So we need to be very, very sure that the gains of all these technologies, which are really accelerated, magnified and amplified gains, don't really concentrate in the hands of too few individuals. And regulation can both accelerate that concentration of benefits, or it can be used to democratize it. So it's a case of regulation is just like technology. It's a double-edged sword. It comes down to how we use it. It's not that the one side is good and the other side is bad at all.
Lovely. So how can we as individuals make sure that the new technology, on that note, has an overall beneficial impact for people, not just in our own countries, but across the globe? Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, so I think my big observation there would be whether we are looking at this as individuals or as corporations or as countries, is to make sure that when we are using technology, we're using technology to increase value and to increase overall productivity rather than to extract rents or to extract value from the system. So technology, once again, it's just a tool. It can be used different ways by different people. But I think if you want to make yourself resilient, if you want to build a more resilient society, we need to be focused on increasing value. And unfortunately, all too many business models we look at when we start looking at how these exponential, to use that terrible term, technologies are being used, quite a few of them are being used to build rent-seeking, value extracting businesses, which make very few people very, very rich, but don't necessarily distribute the full benefit or the full power of these technologies. And I think that they're also not necessarily the most sustainable business models, because the bigger the business is, if it is a completely extricative type of business, it's not a very sustainable business model at all. That's a short-termist way of looking at this technology. Whereas if we choose to look differently and look at perhaps business models and use cases for the technologies that can last for as long as possible, we start asking very, very different questions about how to use this technology when we're looking at how to extract as much as possible in the short term. So if we can add value, we make ourselves more resilient as individuals to protect against, say, technology taking jobs away and all those sorts of things. But we also then end up multiplying the gains of those technologies to come back to what I was saying earlier, do more with less rather than just sort of extract the same amount of stuff but faster.
Yeah, so companies really need to think strategically when they're implementing technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, as you said, to extract value then rather than use it against. So we know that you live in South Africa, a country with a very young population with a lot of potential as the West and China ages. Will the fourth industrial revolution be good for emerging countries like South Africa, or will it undercut its advantages?
Well, it comes back to what I was saying about technology. It tends to accelerate the underlying trends. So unfortunately, if there is a trend towards increasing inequality, technology can accelerate that trend towards increased inequality. At the same time, if there is a trend towards productivity, technology can do that too. So I think it's a hard question to say whether it's a net good or a net bad. It depends on how we deal with it. If we as a country, as a continent in Africa, decide to over-regulate before allowing technology to fulfill itself to its full potential, then we're going to set ourselves up for a very bad couple of decades to come. If, however, we choose to work with technology and to work to really to our strengths, which is, as you say, having a younger population, also having a lot of problems that can be solved with these technologies, then technology could help Africa to make that same really big leapfrog into the future, like we've seen coming out of quite a lot of the more successful developing and now developed markets in Asia. But I think that we have quite a precarious couple of decades ahead of us to get this right in Africa. And probably the biggest challenge is, once again, an educational challenge. So it's a case of too few hands understanding how to use the technologies. And that's very, very dangerous. And we can sort of see this in the less positive trends we're starting to see coming out of the sort of accelerator communities like the Silicon Cape and the Silicon Savannah communities, where a lot of those great ideas that are starting to capitalize on these 4i technologies tend to be getting investment and equity investment from external investors, not from African investors, which means that once again, the sort of fruits and profits of those ideas that are solving very real problems and could become very profitable businesses for Africa, those fruits and rewards end up accruing to foreign investors rather than to local markets. And I think that for me would be one of the dangers. It's not an insurmountable problem at all, but it definitely comes down to awareness of technology and basics, getting the basics in digital literacy right. It's not a case of every kid needs to know how to code, but every kid should understand the potential and the capabilities of these technologies so they can build a career around them rather than end up being net buyers of these technologies. I think that's one of Africa's biggest challenges, and has been for a long time, the whole concept of how do we get value creation to remain on the continent rather than being exported out all the time.
Does the responsibility for that lie with, for example, government to link educational institutions with companies, or does it lie with the educational institutions themselves to get these links, or do these links already exist, or how do we see that link being established or exploited so that there is that industry link? Because as you said, the technology is developing really fast in the industry, and perhaps we need to bring it back into the educational institutions so that there are opportunities for local students to learn and interact with the technology.
I suppose I'll answer that in a slightly different way. I think that when it comes to technologies that are moving this fast, I don't know if it's correct to start with a top-down approach from a government-led approach. Governments don't know about this technology. They're in governance. They're not in the forefront of technology. The forefront of technology is coming either from academia or it's coming from the corporate world, so as they're developing those use cases. And I think that the opportunity and also a little bit of a sort of rebuke comes from the actual corporate sector, because that's where the opportunity is. If corporate's aim is to create wealth and to create productivity and shareholder value, if that corporate was foresighted and looking ahead, they should be investing in the next generation, not just of potential workers, but the next generation of actual consumers. And I think that that's the missing link, and perhaps something that hasn't been addressed enough. Like, I definitely see this in my work. A lot of the businesses that I work with, whether they are big companies or small companies, are looking once again for international funding and looking to get to international markets. And to me, that's hugely short-sighted, because the future consumer is African. By the end of the century, 1 in 3 people is going to be African. So if you are going to build a business, you should be building a business for Africa, in Africa, if you want to make a lot of money. And that's a completely sort of, cold-hearted capitalist view at looking at why we should be investing in this next generation of young Africans, because that's what the future is going to be. That's where the future value creation pool is going to come from. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there. And I think that governments are open to being led in these conversations by corporate actors if they can see the net benefit. And governments are more receptive to those conversations if corporations can show that future plan as to how this is going to benefit the whole of society rather than just the shareholders, because that's what sort of social entrepreneurship or enterprise comes down to being, right? If you are building a business that is adding value to your consumers, that is creating jobs, that's a net good for society. And that's why I think that quite often we get into conversations of like corporate is bad and government is good, or vice versa, depending on what sort of side of the political spectrum you lie on. But it's not that at all. I think that a lot of the same ends we're working towards can be very collaborative, and they can be very participatory between those different stakeholders. We shouldn't be creating silos. We should be definitely creating more networks between academia, corporate, general public, and government too.
And if you see a corporation that's willing to invest and keep the wealth and the knowledge in the local community, you're going to encourage people to work for a company like that as well. So it's a very, very good point, an interesting point. So thank you very much for answering that. I have one final question. So we're going a little left field here. If you had a magic wand, Bronwyn, what 3 things would you do to get ready for the technology change ahead? Now, I know we're saying that the 4th Industrial Revolution is already here and it's progressing, so if you could look ahead, what 3 things would you be prepared for or want to be prepared for?
What 3 things to be prepared for? So I think the first thing is to assess yourself, coming back to that question of value creation. I think that this is a question that individuals need to be asking themselves, but it does roll up to organizations and even to nations to say, are you a net value extractor or are you a net value creator in the value chain? Because this is where the danger lies. When it comes to these technologies are going to be automating away cost centers from every aspect of the global economy. So whether that is a cost-centered job or task you are doing in your organization, that role is at risk of being replaced by these technologies. And that's a good thing, because we should be automating away cost centers and inefficiencies to create, so we can do more with less going forward. The same with business models. If your business model is in the business of extracting rents or extracting value rather than putting value back into the system to multiply that value, then your business model is at risk of competition from a new startup, because that old adage goes, your margin is your competitor's opportunity. You don't want to be in that space. So assess yourself very honestly and see where are you adding value to the overall networks that you're involved with, and make sure that you then accelerate the transition to replacing all the cost centers with these new technologies, because otherwise your competitors are going to be doing that. I think that's the first thing I'd look at. The second thing I'd look at is, what is your timeline? Are you in the business of sort of short term, once again sort of value extraction, or are you in the business of playing a longer game, building a more sustainable business? And I think there is a bit of a trade-off there. They're not entirely mutually exclusive. It's not like you have to choose between sustainability or growth. I don't believe that. I think we've got to focus on ands more than ors. But I think that does come down to the objectives, particularly from a business point of view. Are you planning on building a business that's going to be around for a very long time, or are you trying to sort of sell out for the next sort of, you know, Silicon Valley VC funding round, which seems to be a lot of the conversations I'm seeing. And I'd say that that's great and well for you if you want to aim for that, aim for one of those rock star prizes, get to retire at 23 with your amazing 4-hour business idea. But just be aware that those sort of, you know, massive successes are not available to everyone. There's a lot more space to play in the real long-term sort of value creation game. So choose carefully and decide what game you're actually going to be playing here with these things. And the third thing would be to make friends with technology, to become digitally literate, to understand the capabilities of all these technologies, to keep informed of what's going on in this world. As I say, you don't have to be an expert in understanding how to build tools or to actually, you know, create that technology, but you do need to understand how it can change the world and how it can change your role and the way that you are playing in all the different systems that you are acting in as an economic actor, as a consumer, or as a producer. Because only if you understand the implications of what these technologies are capable of doing, can you participate in the conversations about how they should perhaps be regulated or not. And only then can you start to see where the next business opportunity is coming from, so that you can actually participate in the fruits of these technologies. So those being my 3 points. Make sure you adding value, make sure you understand the technology, and choose your time scale that you're playing in.
Very, very important points. And thank you very much for your time today. I mean, it's been invaluable insights, especially from the business point of view, because I think perhaps, I know we had you in the panel discussion, but that would have been a really nice age because we have people working in the companies, but to actually know and think for the future, it's been really, really invaluable. So thank you very much. I'm really glad we've been able to talk today, and I hope we get an opportunity to talk again. Thank you very much, Bronwyn.
Thank you so much.